First of all, what is the Democratic Unity Fund?
The Democratic Unity Fund, on its face, is a reasonable thing. It was announced on May 17th by Barack Obama. I got an email from the Democratic Party.
This May 17th?
This May 17th.
2019.
2019.
Huh.
And on the face, it makes all the sense in the world. They're trying to raise money for the party because Donald Trump has got $100 and some million already. And individual candidates need to raise money for their presidential campaigns, and working together, the candidate and the Democratic Party could team up, put out some kind of promotional materials, and split whatever donations are given. Mm-hmm. That all makes sense. It's wonderful. Party unity, all that sort of thing. One of the rules that they expressed publicly, and the main thing that, I'll give you the punchline before we end here. The main thing is that the party says they want to have, they're committed to having a fair and transparent primary. Well, when you look into how they're doing the Democratic Unity Fund, it is neither fair nor transparent. They gave away one of the rules, which is that all of the participating candidates would be treated equally. And so I got emails, and honestly, it really came out of the clear blue sky. I had an idea come into my head while I was walking my dog one day, and it said, you better pay attention to those emails that are coming in. And I noticed that I got one from this, that, and the other candidate, but then about 2.5 or so weeks ago, I got a second email on behalf of one of the 8 preferred candidates that they're sending these to. And then a week later, I got another email from another one of the 8, and it clearly pointed out that they're not helping all of the candidates equally.
When you say all,
fairly.
you're talking about
all 25,
all 25, right?
25, 24 that are coming and going, they're dropping out.
Yeah.
But, totally probably more than that. They're helping the candidates that you might expect, the corporate candidates. There's 4 Bs and 4 She's, okay?
Who are they?
Biden, Buttigieg, Booker, and Beto. Harris, Warren, Klobuchar, and Gillibrand. Of those 8, 7 have qualified for the next round of debates. They have all of the donors they need. They have the name recognition, so they're getting 2% in the polls. 7 of the 8, or more. 7 of the 8. The only outlier is Gillibrand. She hasn't gotten either the donations nor the
2%.
2%.
Oh, really? Wow.
She's way on the outside. But 7 of the 8 candidates that the party is promoting actively via sending emails and so forth, they're in the debates. Of the other 25, Bernie has his own power, he has his own backing, he's obviously made the polls, and he's got plenty of donors. So he is one of 2 outliers who are getting in despite not getting any help from the party. And just recently, Andrew Yang is the other one who qualified on his own without any support from the party. But all of the other, well, if you count those 2, all the other 15 candidates the question is, number one, why are they not being helped in the same fashion so that this is fair? And it raises a couple of questions. Were they even asked to participate? Well, I'll give the party the benefit of the doubt that they asked everybody, and I don't know that. I mean, that's information that an investigative journalist might call up all the candidates and see if they were actually asked. I'll assume that they were asked. I'll give them the credit, for doing that. So if they were asked, why are they not participating? What might it have cost them to participate in this? They get access to donors, they get access to an email list being sent out, they get access to the power of the party. The transparency of what is that agreement is the whole point of the DemocraticUnityFund.com website. I'm pointing to something that is neither fair nor transparent. I'm under no illusion. You mentioned the court case in 2017, I think it was, after 2016. The Democratic Party doesn't have to be fair. They can play favorites. They don't have to follow their own rules. They're a business that runs its own thing. And all of these primaries are a form of a charade to make us think we're voting, but we're not voting. As you said, we're not voting for president. We're picking delegates who go to the county convention, who go to the state convention. Your vote gets translated in all kinds of mathematical formulas with this, that, and the other type of category. What's really going on here is they're limiting the choice that we have when we do, at the very least, watch the debates. And while a candidate might struggle through and succeed without being in the debates. Most people would argue that if they didn't get into the debates, that would make it really difficult for them to be seen as a candidate that anybody knows about. And so I'm just calling out on everybody, all of the candidates who are participating, Biden, Buttigieg, Booker, Beto, Harris, Warren, Klobuchar, and Gillibrand, they are participating. I suspect they signed some kind of an agreement. I would like to know what that agreement is. They say they want to be transparent. Well, post that agreement on your website. It's not that hard. The other 17 have not agreed to participate, or they weren't asked, but if they were asked and they chose not to agree, what is in that agreement that they found either distasteful or financially impossible? Because getting access to data like an email list, the Democratic Party's email list could probably be millions in size. And what if you're the special candidate and they give you the email list of donors who always top out at $2,800? That's a list that's worth a lot of money. How much would you pay to have the list of people who've contributed millions of dollars to independent broadcasters? Wow, that list could be valuable. I am not making any accusations. I'm not claiming anybody has broken any laws. I'm saying they're not being fair.
And they're not being transparent.
And they're not being transparent, even though in the footer, the disclaimer on all of these emails, the Democratic Party is committed to a fair and transparent primary. Well, I call bullshit.
Yeah. And you're getting multiple emails from the same 8 people.
I got, it looped around, those 8. I got an email from, in tandem. It sounds like it's coming from Elizabeth Warren, but it's actually coming from Democratic Party at democrats.org, and the name is Elizabeth Warren. And so, all of the links in there go to a web page that is dedicated to Elizabeth Warren and each of the other 8, but then the money can be split by whatever proportion the donor wanted to do between the candidate and the party. And that's all fine and dandy. That's all wonderful. They could have easily put out email after email after email that said, here's all of our candidates, donate to 1, 2, 3, as many of them as you like, and they'll split it. That would have been fair, and they could have posted the agreement with, what did these folks have to agree to do in order to participate? And it would also be nice to know how do they plan on spending that money. And I'd love to see the Federal Election Commission report on how much did Buttigieg receive as part of this, because he's made a lot of money, and everyone else. How much of the donations are coming, not just report on the donor that made the donation, but the donors actually donating through this tandem effort with the party, and then it's going into the candidates' coffers. It makes it look like the candidate is being successful in doing all that work, but they're doing it with the help of the party.
Thank you for sharing that, Jim. That's obviously a whole lot more we could get into, but that's.
I appreciate the time for being here.
Yeah,
they say they want to be fair. They say they want to be transparent. Me too.
Yeah,
I want that too.
Well, we've already seen a list. There's been a recent list too of billionaires. How many billionaires have donated to the candidates too? And that's an interesting list.
One correction on what you said. One of the websites you said was presidenttulsigabbard.com. It's actually .org.
It's .org. Okay.
And but everything I do is wide open. It's all on jamesroguski.com.
Thank you, James.
Thank you for having me.
Each state has their own delegation that goes to represent them in the DNC. And California used to have the primary in June. And as an incentive, the DNC gives states that go later in the primary calendar extra delegates because they don't want to front load the primary. We have Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. They're the first. But if you move your primary up, you get penalized, which is what California did. We moved from June to March, and we were penalized 10% of our total state delegation.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I did not hear about that part.
So our delegation is smaller. Now there's 4 basic types of delegates. There's the automatic delegates, what the DNC calls them. Normal people, we all colloquially call them the super delegates. If a candidate does not receive 50% plus 1 at the convention, then the super delegates get to vote.
I see. So that would be considered like a second round if that needed to happen.
Or third round, and we've gone. The different conventions have gone certain. Subsequently 20, 30, 40 ballots.
Oh, I see.
History.
I see.
Yeah. I think Abraham Lincoln was nominated something like on the 40th ballot or something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Of course, that was the Republican Party, which
Right.
was, they were more progressive at that time than the Republican Party obviously is now.
State of California has a 15% threshold. So,
Which means-
So a candidate would need to receive 15% either in the district to get district delegates or 15% statewide to get at-large and pleo delegates. So let's say you have a candidate and they only get 14% in statewide and they get no more than 14% in any of the districts. They're entitled to 0 delegates.
Wow. Well, so if they so they have to have at least 15%.
At least 15.
So how would they get, let's say, more than 1 delegate in a district if there were, let's say, 10 delegates? Or
Well, so if there's 10 delegates available,
Yeah.
what you would look at is the district results. So it depends on, in each district, how many candidates have reached that 15% threshold. So let's say, for example, Joe Biden has 30% of the overall total, but only, let's say, for the sake of simplicity, let's say that Joe Biden had 30% and then Bernie Sanders had 25% and then Harris had 20%. So actually, so it said 30, 25, 20, right? So that's 55, that's 75 total. So Joe Biden is entitled to 30% of that 75%. You don't count the candidates that did not reach that 15% threshold.
Oh, wow. So that would eliminate most of the candidates right there just by not getting that 50%,
Right.
15% threshold.
Right. And so what's interesting too is we're going to have these, by the time California rolls around, it's going to be, 2 months after Iowa, after New Hampshire, there's going to be candidates that have dropped out.
Right.
But because we have mail-in ballots dropping around the same time of the Iowa caucuses, there could be people voting for candidates. They put in their ballot in the mail, then they're voting for a candidate that's not going to reach the 15% threshold. Well, there's different ways to do the math, but yeah, each district we're looking at how much percent has each candidate received of those who reached the 15% threshold, and then once you determine that, actually you get that number, and then you multiply that out by the number of delegates available.
So you're assuming that there may only be 4 candidates.
Well, theoretically, possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
To reach that 15% threshold.
Right, right.
I have a delegate calculator that I sent you, and that is based actually on a recent California poll.
Oh.
So it's not just numbers I just made up.
Oh.
I just based it, if that poll was accurate and those were the results, that's actually what it would look like.
Oh, wow. So do you know the demographics of the people in that poll?
I do not.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. They never tell you when they have polls. They don't tell you usually who the demographics are. What that consists of. I know there was a poll. I think it was done by an organization called Emerson or something like that, and I do believe it included the demographics, and it was a diversity of people and ages, and that's the first time I'd seen a poll, at least in this election cycle so far, where they released the demographics a little more specifically. And when you have a diverse demographic that you're polling, guess who is far ahead? It's Bernie Sanders. So that's why I wonder, well, what demographics are they using when they say Joe Biden is has the 5 or 10% lead over Bernie? But it always seems to show that it is Biden-Bernie. Right, most of the polls that they release.
And that's, I think, one of the problems with polls is they could be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's right.
So you can have a lot of polls showing Joe Biden as the top vote getter, and then it gets into people's mind, well, we got to elect Joe Biden because he's the one who's going to take on Trump.
Exactly.
But the poll's based on, voters over 65 years old.
That's right. Or let's say if it's CNN doing the poll, the average viewer of CNN is 60-something years old. So that's another thing they don't talk about. And why people limit themselves, to this, to just these mainstream media networks, when their average viewers are like retirement age or even older, like 65 or older, and yet they have such a stronghold. I should say the big money in the political system. They own the media. These media companies, they have such a stronghold on the American public, particularly Middle America. that they don't really represent the whole of America. So what's interesting about this election that we have right now is that, unlike the last election, I have a feeling there's going to be a lot more younger people and a lot more people of color that are going to be voting because they saw what happened last time, right? And they don't want a repeat of what happened last time. So CNN or MSNBC or even Fox, they're not necessarily going to report that because they're still going to rely on their viewership, the people that tend to go out and vote, which are older, from the way it has been up to this point, right? So this election could be completely different, or it could be have a similar outcome, but just using different strategies to get there, because this is a very well-oiled machine we're talking about here, and our political system is technically corrupt, right? Because we actually have a Supreme Court law that is called Citizens United. So, like if it was another country, it would be totally against the law, to have lobbying or, to have money in the political system like that.
Well, there was a lawsuit with the DNC where basically they argued in court that we don't need to provide fair elections.
Wow. That's true. I mean, and well, there's been so many, we already know what happened to the outcome last time. I mean, obviously there were emails that were leaked. And clearly, I saw some of them, and they were marginalizing of Bernie Sanders and Cornel West, who he had picked for for the platform committee. And I said, "Wow!" And that's only a small tip of the iceberg of the emails. And of course, then obviously the DNC couldn't deny it, so that's why Debbie Wasserman Schultz stepped down, right? So and then there was the super delegates that were used obviously to benefit Clinton, particularly in those places where Bernie won the majority of the popular vote in the primaries. And in the case of West Virginia, he won all 55 counties. And then there was a Bernie delegate standing behind the person answering the roll call at the convention who had a sign say Bernie won all 55 counties, while they're reading the roll call to the chairman that Hillary Clinton got something like 35 of the votes, for the whole state, and then Bernie got 15. So it was things like that that exposed the fact that something was going on there, So we got Hillary Clinton. Many people feel, because that's how the DNCs decided to run their club.
I think back in 2012, there actually was a candidate in prison from West Virginia, and he was entitled to some delegates too. And there was another protest candidate over in Louisiana, and I don't believe they seated those delegates for the 2012 DNC.
The Green New Deal as a political program was first brought up by the Greens Party of England and Wales in 2008 as an answer to the Great Recession, the financial and housing collapse, 2007 to 2009. So that was 2008. In 2009, the European Greens ran on a Green New Deal for Europe. And so I got asked to run for governor, and I told the Greens in New York, let's run on the Green New Deal as our theme. And their first reaction was, oh, New Deal, that's Democratic. But I persuaded them that we want to appeal to those Democrats who still think the Green or the Democratic Party is the New Deal Democrats. It's been the corporate New Democrats for a long time.
Exactly.
But a lot of the rank and file still has that hope. So the contrast between us and Cuomo would draw people our way. That's the argument I made, and they said, okay, let's go with that. Actually, back in 2000, I proposed the same thing to the Green Party USA, and we ended up with a plank that was called the Global Green Deal. They wouldn't go with New Deal, Green New Deal.
Yeah.
So it's been, on our minds. It really encapsulates the center of the Green Party's program. So it's become our theme for the last decade. The problem is, after the 2018 election, the Sunrise Movement with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez showing up at Pelosi's office demanding a Green New Deal. And that was great. They got public attention. The media loved it. It went viral. And by December, maybe 3 weeks later, they did a poll. 80% of the American public wanted a Green New Deal, including 64% of the Republicans.
Imagine that.
Really popular. The problem for us was, while it was good that they got it all this attention, they took the brand and diluted the content. By the time we got to the first of the year, and because Pelosi had killed the select committee for a Green New Deal that might have put legislation directly to the floor, she wanted to put it through committees she had appointed the leadership of. They had a non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal. And unfortunately, it left out key parts of the Green New Deal as the Green Party's been advocating it. For example, we want 100% clean energy and zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, because that's what the carbon budget that the climate scientists say rich countries have to meet. As Greta Thunberg schooled the ambassadors to the UN General Assembly a few weeks ago explained. So that's really what we've got to do. And they extended the deadline to 2050, the non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal.
Is that also the United Nations too?
The United Nations UN environmental, there's a environmental agency, and they called for a Green New Deal in 2009 as well. Maybe it was even late 2008, but it's very watered down. It's not as strong as we're talking about. But back to the non-binding resolution, they extended the deadline. They eliminated a key demand, which is to ban fracking and all new fossil fuel infrastructure. If we don't do that, we're going to build out this infrastructure that the investors expect to be making money off by burning fossil fuels for 3, 4, 5 decades, and then it's too late. We want to phase out nuclear power. They dropped that. We want deep cuts in military spending and put those resources and that know-how, the engineers, the technicians, into the Green New Deal energy transformation. So these things are essential to the Green New Deal, and it was watered down. The good thing is they kept the Economic Bill of Rights in the non-binding resolution, which is really important because we got to assure everybody that they'll be economically secure while we make this radical transformation of our economy. So then what happened? Pelosi never let them vote on it in the House. And then old wily leaders, McConnell in the Senate said, well, half you Democratic senators are running for president, so we'll let you vote on it. Get you on the record. And Schumer said, oh, that's a trick. I want y'all to vote present. And the good little Democrats all voted present, except 4 of them voted with the Republicans against it. So the Green New Deal's already been killed by the Democratic leadership. But they can't make it go away because it's so popular. So all the Democratic presidential candidates are talking about it. They all got a version of the Green New Deal. The problem here is, to the extent they say anything, except for Bernie Sanders, and I'll talk about him in a minute, they all say it's all based on regulations and tax incentives. And they only spend 1 to 3 trillion over 10 years in public money. That's not even serious. We have an eco-socialist Green New Deal budget that calls for 27 trillion over 10 years. And we can talk more about why that's necessary. Sanders is the exception in the Democrats. He comes out with 16.3 over 10 years. And while he doesn't show his numbers like we do, if you go to my website at howiehawkins.us and look at that budget, you can click on the line items and see how we got our numbers, how we got the cost, how many jobs it creates, how many manufacturing jobs it creates. Bernie gives the conclusions but doesn't say where he got the numbers. But we look at that and we think he's probably about right. The reason is his is less than ours is he goes till 2050. He wants 100% clean electricity by 2030 and public ownership and planning to make that happen, which we agree with. But when it comes to manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, and buildings, which is 72% of our greenhouse gas emissions, he goes till 2050. And again, that's too slow. But Bernie's he's got the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure. He's got the phase out of nuclear power. And he's got the cuts in military spending. He doesn't give numbers, but he says we got to do that and put it into the clean energy transition. So he's going in the right direction. So, we think his proposal is serious. It's just a little too slow.
So 27% is focused basically on sequestering the carbon. Is that, and the rest of it like focusing on energy like electricity?
Well, no. If you go to 100% clean electric power production, you will cut 28% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And so, a lot of the proposals aim to get there by 2030 or 2035, but then they leave the other 72% for the distant future. And you give politicians till 2050, they're just going to wait now. They ain't going to get serious about it. So what we do in the eco-socialist Green New Deal is say we got to do what we did during World War II, where the federal government either built or took over from companies like GM and Ford 25% of the manufacturing capacity in order to turn industry on a dime into what they called the arsenal of democracy to defeat the fascists. And we need to do nothing less for climate change. So in addition to the public power sector, we want a national railroad corporation to build electrified freight rails, electrified high-speed bullet trains between the cities, and within the cities, the light rail trolley systems. Like we got a trolley track going
the
right
trolley
by
track
us.
right here, exactly.
LA had the largest trolley system in the world,
Yeah.
and by a conspiracy of the auto and oil and rubber companies, bought it out, tore it up, and put them dependent on buses, which aren't very good anyway. I live in Syracuse, and I have a map from 1903, and at that time, every abode in the city was within 2 blocks of a trolley, and they ran every 15 minutes. You could get around the city better on that trolley than you can today by a car, and it's a poor city. Half the people don't have cars. They depend on the buses, and it's really difficult to get around. So we got to get back to that. So we need a national railroad corporation, and then we need a public sector to rebuild through the federal government our manufacturing sector, which has been hollowed out by the trade agreements which allow manufacturing to be offshored. We don't even have a machine tool industry to speak of in this country.
Wow.
And they build the equipment
That's right.
for intermediate goods manufacturing and consumer goods manufacturing. So we got to rebuild that. And then we got to build a new manufacturing sector based on clean energy, zero emissions of the carbon and other greenhouse gases, and zero waste. So we're not putting toxics into the environment. And we're recycling, like rare earth minerals and so forth. So we need to do things like cement. There are ways of producing cement without carbon. Now it's calcium carbonate goes into that Portland cement. They heat it up, and the carbon part goes into the atmosphere. It's 5 to 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. It's a huge problem, but it's solvable. We got the technology. Or take making steel. Now we use coke ovens, which is kind of like coal that's been treated, and then it's burned to heat up the steel. You can do that with electric arc furnaces, and through all the technologies, we got to transform it, and that's going to require, especially to do it on the timetable we're talking about, public ownership and planning, like we did during World War II with the weapons sector. The difference this time is after the war, they gave back all that manufacturing equipment to the super rich and the giant corporations for pennies on the dollar. We want to keep it in the public sector and lease it out to worker cooperatives, where workers can control their labor process and receive the full fruit of their labor, and we have a more equitable distribution of income at the beginning instead of safety net programs that only partially ameliorate the inequitable distribution of income.
So worker ownership is something that is based on people coming together, like Mondragon in Spain. We have 75,000 plus worker owners plus employees, but it's a one person, one vote kind of environment, to where even the CEO, everybody voted, CEO only makes like 12 times more than the average worker instead of 300, 400, 500 times. So it is a way to democratically address every kind of situation.
Every sector, we should have economic democracy. We can't have political democracy without economic democracy, which is socialism.
Absolutely.
And the problem now is, Bernie Sanders talks about the billionaire class. Their concentrated wealth and economic power translates into concentrated political power, which means they can obstruct reforms we even get passed.
Exactly.
Like all these Democrats, except for Bernie, are calling for to deal with their Green New Deal, the climate crisis, regulations and tax incentives. And the regulations, the concentrated economic power that translates to concentrated political power, they're going to gum it up. We got to take the power from them and put it in the hands of the people. They will resist those regulations. I mean, we've had all kinds of mandates and whatnot, and the utilities, for example. Look at PG&E. They haven't invested in the infrastructure. Now they just shut down the power because they haven't kept the corridors where the wires are clean. A publicly administered system, it's our system now, and we can make sure they keep the infrastructure up.
Exactly.
So, across the board,